I guess if we spent enough time on the floor with the children, it was assumed that the knowledge would just eventually find us.
We need to teach children how to sit down and learn some of these skills. We haven't understanding the behavior. Why are the students behaving the way they are?
There's a lot of arguments where executive function is where children are adapting to this. So what's happening is this is their new normal. This is how it works for them.
So the question then is not whether or not we're doing it, but how can we do it with a lot more intention?
A child who can't sit still isn't being difficult. A child who melts down at transition time isn't being dramatic. A child who forgets the instructions you just gave 30 seconds ago isn't being careless. They're showing us exactly where their brain is in their development. And if we don't know what we're looking at, we respond to the behavior instead of the need every single time. Welcome back to the Early Years podcast, brought to you by the Early Years Academy by ParentApp, your village for the early years. I'm your host, Dana, and today we're talking about executive function, a fancy term for basically foundational skills. The set of skills that has to be developed underneath everything else we're trying to build. And what we'll be exploring today is not just what executive function is, but what does it look like in our classrooms and what we're doing in our daily practice that either builds it or misses it. I have two guests with me today that I'm really glad to be in conversation with. Yogi Patel is a master trainer, founder of 2 Montessori schools, certified Positive Discipline Association trainer, and someone who has spent over 35 years working with parents, educators, and leaders worldwide. Her experience sits right at the intersect of what we know about child development and what actually changes inside of a classroom. And Hiba is an educational consultant who brings a really grounded, practical lens to how all of this plays out on the ground in our systems, in leadership, in meetings, and in the gap between what schools know how to do and what they actually do. So welcome Hiba, welcome Yogi.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So I wanted to start by outing myself here a little bit because I think it sets up this entire conversation. So I trained through the International Preschool Curriculum, and I also have a master's in education. And I'm only bringing this up to mention that in all of that years of schooling and training that I've done, not once did anyone use the words executive function. Not in a lecture, not in a training room, not in a module or an assignment on even child development. I came out of years of formal study with a detailed picture of what children should be learning, but almost no language for the underlying foundation that I now know makes any of this learning possible. And I don't think my experience is unusual. I actually think it's the norm, right? So before we go anywhere else, I wanted to talk about what executive function actually is for those who may be hearing it for the first time, and why, given how much it matters, do you think it's glossed over?
Well, executive functions are, the things that we would like our children to have. We speak about all the behaviors we have in our children. They're not listening, they're hitting, they're throwing tantrums, they're delaying. And then the opposite is we want them to have critical thinking, problem solving skills, ability to delay gratification. And those are executive function, things that we would like our children to have. And Adele Diamond, she's a amazing researcher out of Canada, speaks about 3 main areas of the executive functions. Inhibitory control, being able to pause before acting, that ability to delay gratification. It's something that builds over time, and it's something that we develop in our classrooms and in our home. Working memory, right? I can hold the instruction in mind. I know what I have to do, and I can hold that thought for a long period of time, which is also developed in our classrooms and home versus having so much stimulus that's given to this children where they're not able to keep track of information in their head, the multiplication memory and everything else we're talking about. And then the cognitive flexibility, like I can shift when things don't go my way. So if I have a problem with something, or if I can't do something, I'm able to persevere for a longer period of time.
Right. So it's the working memory, it's the cognitive, what is it, flexibility or adaptability?
Flexibility.
Flexibility. And then the last one was something to do with control, impulse control.
That's right.
Okay. So I think somehow and somewhere along the way, it became assumed that as educators, we're just going to absorb that knowledge. I guess if we spent enough time on the floor with the children, and it was assumed that the knowledge would just eventually find us. And while I think that there's truth to that, experienced educators do develop intuition, but I still believe that intuition without the learned knowledge is really hard to act on. I remember there's countless times where I was in conversation with parents where I knew that there was a reason this child couldn't meet the set milestones. There was an underlying cause, but I couldn't defend it. I couldn't share it with the parent or with my colleagues or with a leader who was asking me to justify my thoughts and my reasoning, because I needed to know, more. And I guess what I want to get is, why aren't we taught this? Like, why are we left to kind of discover it in practice? But that's actually when we need it the most.
Well, in our case, what happens is we go through school and we're told, we need to teach children how to sit down and learn some of these skills. We haven't understanding the behavior. Why are the students or children at home behaving the way they are? And we are just hurrying through the intellectual growth. And that seems to be one of the cultural things that we have been doing for hundreds of years. And now that we understand the importance of how students learn or children learn, that we are now focusing on developing or understanding the behavior. So imagine in our childhood, your question was like, why have we not done this? And I have no idea about why we didn't have this simple answer, but now that we do, it's so simple to understand our expectation. So we sort of address this executive function in our schools in a different way, where we have had developmental milestones, right? So it's been introduced in a different way, but not so directly. So between 2 and 3, this is what a child should be doing between age 3 and 4. However, executive functions or development in our children happen with experiences, right? These executive functions build when these children have had the opportunity to develop them. So a 3-year-old, and of course their neurological, their biological makeup has something to do with it. So when we expect all 3-year-olds or all 2-year-olds to do the same thing, I think it's a miss. So we have to look at, why is this student not able to wait his turn? Maybe they're grabbing things from someone else. Well, maybe this inhibitory control is still developing. So Montessori classrooms and things that we speak about. We actually can have activities. We used to do the dance, dance, and freeze, or walking on a line. Maybe you're doing tippy toes or heel to toe and then carrying objects. We're developing those executive functions. And a student that forgets, starts walking from their table to where they need to go to grab a pencil. Now they got lost and they're beginning to walk.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to have some activities that say, go, bring me this, bring me that. If we do that often, now we're developing. You have to remember something in your mind. You have to move at a distance and come back. We're teaching this skill. And a child is having a meltdown because someone else has the activity they wanted, or things of that nature. Well, how are we going to create the ability to delay that gratification? I think those are all the important things that we can do in our classroom. So I answered your question in multiple ways to say, I can't believe that these small things that it's at our fingertips, that we haven't been able to present in all environments.
Right. Or translate even into textbooks or written knowledge. But absolutely. So I really do hope that, this podcast makes its way out to every early childhood educator out there. When I did eventually come across executive function skills and I learned about them, Yogi, there was a version that I learned that sounded like a list of deficits. So when I consider working memory, cognitive flexibility, I think we said, and impulse control, I often viewed those things as what a child can't do yet. And I don't think I was ready very early in my career to hold that as information and work my way from there. So I was wondering if you had any, let's say, advice or anything to share for educators who also read that list and automatically assume deficits in children, as opposed to opportunities for supports.
Yes, I think we're always, as teachers, when I work with them through the training, we're always looking at developing these life skills while these students are in our classrooms. So how long are these students in our classroom? If it's a Montessori program, perhaps 3 years, and perhaps not, based on when they come into it. But these life skills, these executive functions, are developed and strengthened and, layered over time. However, as teachers, we believe that we have to develop those in our classroom. And then we force it so much that when it doesn't go the way we plan, we see them as challenging behaviors versus the opportunities to grow, is what you start speaking about. And I think we get stuck in that. So we have to first, when we have the students in our classroom, we have to see them. Maria Montessori said, you don't have to like what the child does, but you have to love them. They're born with 100 billion neurons, and they're connecting at such a fast rate, especially we know from birth to 5. So at that time, if we see that as a possibility, when a student is having a meltdown, we can say, oh, aha, what is happening? I'm going to be that detective and figure out maybe they're needing something. What is it that they need? And if we can give them like the medicine for that symptom, not something else, then the executive functions will, develop. Maybe we need to pause. Maybe we as the adults need to model. Because what if, go find your work? Well, that's not how we're going to develop it. I see you're really upset. What is it that you wanted? What do you think you can try? Maybe you can take 3 deep breaths. Maybe you can count. Maybe you can skip. Maybe you have 2 choices. We are aiding to this executive function development. Or I'm just going to work with you. Let's find everything that's red in the classroom and bring it on this mat. Or let's, oh my goodness, it didn't work out. What do you think you can try? Just having those, curiosity questions that we can develop. So I think as teachers, we are so creative. We have these. So what if we now looked at behaviors as a tool to let us know that this student has not developed this executive function to the level that's creating some frustration? And how can we create this? Because that's what teaching is, isn't it? For us to develop these skills in early years so that they can layer education. And we know executive functions are so important. This is how the brain, the neuroscience talks about the wiring that's happening, and strong connectors are building in this year for the later learning to happen.
Right. I automatically saw myself in my first and second year of teaching as you were talking. The one that comes to mind is with regards to working memory of children. So I remember once I was being observed of all days, and I was standing there in the front of the class, and I was saying to my children, like, okay, it's breakfast time. It's time for breakfast. It's time for breakfast. And, the children weren't doing anything about it. And, I remember being like really frazzled and thinking like, oh my goodness, like why aren't they doing what they need to do? And I was very fortunate that I was being observed by, a leader who took this opportunity to coach and mentor me. And she said, Dana, what is it that you want the kids to do right now? And I said, well, I need them to line up so they can wash their hands because it's breakfast time. And she said, try telling them that. And I was like, okay, all right, everybody, so let's tidy up and we got to line up because we have to wash our hands. And she's like, whoa, no, like just give them one instruction at a time. Like that's a lot. And so I think working memory is one that surprises educators the most when we really sit with it, because we give so many multi-step instructions all day long. Like put your bag away, wash your hands, come to the mat. And we say it once, right? And we move on. And then we get so frustrated when only the first or the last step is happening. And we think these children aren't listening, or, they aren't being respectful. I clearly asked and I asked nicely, when it has nothing to do with any of that. It's just that in early childhood, as you mentioned, Yogi, working memory is being built. Like this is the time for it to be built. It's not the time for us to expect that it's built and ready at 2 and 3 years old, where we can then ask them to call upon it. No, this is where our environment and practice and our support and scaffolding, makes that happen. So.
Yeah, and Dana, I might add exactly all the teachers, when we come into the classrooms, there are so many unknowns and order, right? Routines. These young children, they do not have the concept of time, right? It's not developed yet. So we have to meet the students in our environment where they are. So having a daily routine is the most important thing. Yeah. They need to know what comes first, what comes second, third. You come into the classroom, maybe we need to change our shoes or get ready for that breakfast. What happens first, second, and third? And sometimes we could even have cues and we can just say, what time is it? So asking questions is another way that we can get the brain to initiate and start to think. So exactly. The first years, we can just slow down. We just want to move so fast. We want to give those lessons and we want to prepare these educators. But those simple things that we're doing in our classroom, those are more important than any lesson that we can give, because if a student can't sit down and concentrate for a few minutes, the lesson is not worth it.
No. And something that I learned the hard way as well, Yogi, and I know I'm jumping now, so we'll come back to our why, but is that when executive function skills are skipped over or they're glossed over, the child doesn't eventually catch up. It just compounds, right? So in early childhood, it could be a child who, let's say, struggling with their working memory. And then as they get older, we see them, what might we see? Like they would, their organization skills, let's say in high school, probably, they'd misplace things. They would forget their due dates. They would need more support. So when we rush past them, or when we gloss over them, or when we don't focus on them in early childhood, they compound and they show up in different ways later on in life.
So true.
So I think this
Absolutely.
is I was going to say this is a perfect segue into then, what do we know about why executive function skills matter so much? So why is the early years specifically, like this window, the perfect opportunity to work on them?
It's the perfect opportunity because this is where the basis, the main frame, the main brain area is building. The neural connectors are forming connections at this time. And more the practice, it's about hands-on working, being able to practice all of these things, strengthen the ability to delay gratification and being able to have that cognitive stress, right? When things are going wrong, I'm going to persevere, or I am going to be able to concentrate regardless of what's happening. If that is not built in early childhood, we're not saying it's not going to be built later on. However, it's so much more difficult because now it's about habits and it's about practice in early childhood from birth to even age 12, when we've had this consistency, when the students have had this ability, those neural connectors and the strength, the critical thinking, problem solving, all of those have been built. Now the student has the practice, right? So nowadays we're talking about having all these stimulus, which is not hands-on. It might be looking at the computer or, gaming. And we go to a restaurant and I see a lot of children with the tablets. That's not hands-on learning. So we're giving our cognitive ability. We're just passive participants. And that's not where that practice is happening. And that affects a students later on because they haven't developed the ability to think about a project or to be able to wait. And that leads to our IQ, executive function, the learning, the habits, the layering of knowledge.
Right.
I was reading an article about executive function, about like the use of technology and whatnot. And then I was reading about this argument about that nowadays, that technology, these kids, they'll sit there and they'll scroll. Like my daughter, for example, she'll watch something, she'll watch it on like 2 speed, right? She understands it. I don't. So there's a lot of arguments where executive function is where children are adapting to this, so it's changing with time. So what's happening is this is their new normal, this is how it works for them, and it's just different for them than it was for us. So this is for them, this is how their executive function is starting to work. So I found that really interesting because for me, I'm somebody that I feel like, electronics, there's too much of a distraction. It causes too much, it doesn't help with self-regulation. It doesn't help with this and it doesn't help with that. But then when I read this, it kind of made me think about it in a different way, where the addition of electronics and them using it at school every day, and these kids are still managing, right? They're still managing. And if anything, a lot of these children nowadays are more self-aware than we were back in the day when it comes to their mental health, when it comes to all this stuff. They're more willing to speak up than we ever were able to speak up. So I just found that was interesting. I just thought I would throw that in if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Hiba. I think we are adapting, we are changing, and there is a lot that we don't know. However, we do know that in early childhood, if you don't have these stronger connectors, executive function, which is only by doing, it's not by passing, giving out. So you can give out later in years, that being able to learn through technology. But if you don't have those executive functions in early years, it's going to be challenging. And I think we're going to have more data and research. Adele Diamond, her research is really, intense, and it's talking about it has to be, being able to write and all the things that we're getting away from. So certainly we're going to evolve and we're going to grow. And it'll be interesting to see what happens to the learning and the brain's capacity, because forever we've used the prefrontal cortex to be able to regulate, to calm, to gather, and that's always been hands-on. So it's interesting to see what would happen if that's not developed. Are we giving away our humanity, our human being? Because by the way we think, the way we create, the way we imagine, all happens here. So I appreciate this article, and I'm curious to see what more research will have to say about our IQ and growth and evolving.
Have you ever noticed how little ones, even the little ones in the earlier story, Dana, they know, like they'll grab the phone, they'll automatically know. Like even if I say I haven't let my child touch it, it obviously automatically know. They just swipe up. It's like they're born. They come out of the womb knowing what to do. It's crazy. So yeah. Sorry, Dana, I cut you
It's
off.
very intuitive.
Yeah, exactly, Yogi. It's intuitive, right? And I think that's what makes it so addicting, is that you don't need a manual, you don't need explanation. It's something that gets placed in your hand, and your body kind of takes over there. But I want to go back to a little bit of the research that I read, which ties, it's like a predictive relationship between executive function skills and outcomes in life. And what always stayed with me is that the executive function skills is a strong predictor of school readiness, or even a stronger predictor of school readiness than IQ is. And that reframes everything, I think, that we're kind of preparing children for as early childhood educators. So we spend a lot of time, especially during the child's last term in, let's say, a nursery or a preschool setting, focusing on literacy and numeracy and phonics, because we're always thinking that, okay, they're going off to school and I have to set them up as best as possible. And those things matter to a certain extent. But again, if a child arrives at school and they're unable to hold information and they're unable to shift between tasks or unable to manage an impulse long enough to be able to listen to the teacher and learn, then, as you said, Yogi, the academic content that we're working so hard to instill in them isn't going to land. And then I guess it kind of, like us building walls before we've laid down the foundation, it's kind of fruitless. So, yeah.
I think it's important for us to examine our education systems. And, in the next years, we're going to see a change, because the way we're educating children past, middle school or past age 12, what's that going to look like? Because it's already changing the way our children grow and learn, and more hands-on or group learning is going to be important, and the executive functions being that base. Because imagine trying to have everyone pay attention to one thing. What's that going to look like? When we don't have the executive functions of inhibition of control, if you can't sit still or delay gratification, there's no way that we could stay on task. And what would that group learning look like if you can't give and take? What would that look like? And it's not to be fearful of, it's just to be concerned or to be aware of in the importance of having these executive functions and the way that they're developed. Are we delivering those? Are we creating those? Or are we giving into the behaviors because we just don't know what to do with them? And if we just look at these behaviors as opportunities, I think we have it, because we can see every challenge as, I know I have to work more on developing delayed gratification here for this young person. If they are used to having, and imagine with this swiping and I want the screens. You want the screen, because it's attractive. You want, this young person wants to swipe and scroll, and because they want to see what comes next.
Yeah.
And if we can just have that delayed gratification, being able to say no to that iPad or a technology for 10 minutes while we're developing those executive functions, for sure.
Right. I think something that I keep coming back to is, if you actually ask an early years educator what they want for children, and I've done this as a principal in training rooms, or whenever I've sat with parents, the answers are actually really beautiful. I think most of them would say that they want curiosity for their children, resilience, because they know how important that is, for them, or the ability to manage their emotions. So I guess regulation. And then there's parents who also mention like a love for learning and that intrinsic motivation. So when you consider all those, but then you look at the structure of a lot of early year settings, you see how few opportunities there are for children to make meaningful children, very little opportunities for children to wait. As you said, delayed gratification. So even educators incorporating little wait times into their schedule. But no, because transitions are managed for speed, right? Rather than support. It's like you're going to say, okay, everybody's shoes on. And the moment a child is struggling to put their shoes on, you're going to have somebody jump in because you have a class of 20 children and you need to get out of the door. You can't wait until Sally figures out how to put on her shoes. You need her to just get going. And all those daily structures that we're not integrating, they're taken away from the developmental work, whether we're intending or not. So the question, I think, is whether we're going to be intentional about factoring in things like delayed gratification, as you mentioned, Yogi. So if we know we're going to end up giving them the tablet, Hiba, we could just say you get it in 10 more minutes instead of right away, right? It's like we purposely build that into our daily routine.
Yeah, definitely. What I was going to say something about how now statistically it's been proven or it's been said that this new generation, like Gen Z, for example, they are, let's say their IQ is different level than the generation before them. But I was reading about it, and the last comment was, how can we save Generation Alpha? Which is Generation Alpha, which is our early years right now, right? So basically, what I get out of all of this is basically executive function is the way to save Generation Alpha. So yeah, so the whole article was about, and on the New York Post, it was talking about how nowadays it's because of this addiction to the electronics and whatnot, and the speed of life and all of this and everything and going and going, 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 going. The kids, they don't have the right skills or academics or even IQ, like I don't want to use the word that the article used. Used dumber than the generation before them. You know what I mean? Fortunately, which is kind of sad. So what do we do? I guess we're gonna have to use executive function skills to help with these kids that are up and coming in our early years right now. So yeah.
Yeah,
Well said, Hiba. I think we have to take the time to train. And what you were just talking about, Dana,
yeah,
in our classrooms, that shoes, we have to take the time to show Sally how to put the shoes on. We have to take the time on showing our children how to wash those hands, how to. That is our job. And not doing for, but doing with, and inviting the role of play instead of segregation or just free play. So the free play is good. However, how do we play together? What does it look like? Including movement with learning, it's really going to be important. So when you're learning and when you're thinking, for example, go bring a pencil. You have to think about getting that pencil, what you are going to get. You have to imagine what color pencil you're going to achieve, bring back. So all of those, that helps with the working memories and that relationship. Human beings are connected individuals. You can't connect with technology, though ChatGPT and AI prompts will say, that's a great question, and it seems like they're your friend. But the
100%.
relationship contexts are built within one another, right? So therefore, the importance of hands-on learning and early childhood educators' role, it's important more than ever in building executive functions and increasing this IQ, because more that humanity that I said, we're giving it away. And
You know
there's a
what,
way that we
Yogi?
can keep it and create an intelligent generation.
You know, Yogi, what you were saying, I'm going to go back to what I was saying about Gen Z. I think about COVID and, not having that connection. Gen Z really did get a bad end. It really didn't get that. Like they were isolated like for what, 2 years, and it was like in their core times. I remember my kids were in their early years when that happened. And it got to a point where they're not getting proper human interaction. They're not in the nurseries or in the daycares or learning how to improve their executive functions, their inhibitory skills, all of this stuff. They don't understand that they have to wait, they have to do this. So that's probably a big reason why Generation Z is so affected by like intellectually and whatnot. So I just thought I would add that.
Yeah, Hiba, and I think what you just said is absolutely true. Those children, they saw mass, they didn't see the verbal,
That's
right?
it.
Even the
Yeah.
learning, modeling is the way we learn. Neuroconnectors, like, we watch somebody else and that's how we learn. That's who we are as human beings. So we didn't see a lot of that. We didn't see a lot of friends and family.
No.
So
All we
these
talked
students
about was
too.
social distancing, right? That was it. Social distancing, social distancing. So that played a big
yeah,
role right there.
And it's important for us as leaders too, this brings up. So those students who didn't get those executive functions for those few years, it's not that it's the end of it. They
No.
really could be involved in hands-on learning now and doing things and reducing their use of technology support versus using their own thoughts, writing essays, writing papers, thinking clearly versus looking for these aid is going to increase their executive function skills. So those listening, it's not the end if you have a teenager or a student that's growing up or was born around that time. So it starts with doing chores at home or helping out around the school. So if you have middle school or high school or secondary school student, it's not done and all.
Right. And again, I'll go back to the fact that it does compound. So there's a compounding effect. If you don't have the executive function or have executive function difficulties and they're not supported, no matter when, they're just going to keep showing up differently as children get older. So again, it's not about missing the window and that's it, you're done for it. No, it's recognizing that the signs will show up differently. So a child who can't regulate at 3, at 7, or as a teenager, they could be a child who can't manage frustration, or a child who has outbursts, or problems managing their impulses. But knowing how executive function deficits or deficits in these executive function skills show up for children later on is going to help us know the kind of support that they need or where we can come in. And one other thing I wanted to come back to, Yogi, is when you talked about the tying the shoe. And if I could tell myself something as an early childhood educator, it would be that moment where that child's struggling to tie their shoe and I stop is worth 1,000 times more than where I'm hurrying them off to. And I know that as an educator, I just really wanted her to get her shoes on because I don't want her to miss circle time, and I'm going to circle time, and circle time is, it's circle time. But thinking back, what I could have taught her in that moment of her struggling and just, supporting or scaffolding, modeling, standing by her and letting her figure it out. Oh man, the skills she would have learned over what I was singing in circle time, So, but, that the more that we know, the better we get, I guess, in our practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dana. And as educators, what we don't know in the first few years, we learn through time and this podcast and other details. Well, it's inspiring for teachers to learn 1 or 2 more tools in the cause and effect so we could do something differently, right? So it's something that's not the same. And one thing I wanted to add is Chris Willard, also from Harvard, and Donna Hicks from Harvard are talking about dignity. And so when a student's dignity is at stake, they're going to go offline. Their brain is going to go into the flight, fight, and freeze. If they're dysregulated, like if their safety, Amy Edmondson talks, again, from Harvard, speaks about psychological safety. For a student not being able to put their shoes on and missing out on that circle time, psychological safety is rocked. Like it is not present. Do you think that student is online or using executive function? It's flight, fight, and freeze. There's tantrum, there's crying, there's desperation. I can't put my shoes on. And we have to reimagine our education system and our belief system on what our classroom should look like. If we have this, and I talk about it a lot in my positive discipline training, is like the circle time. It should be for, you sit down and you begin the circle and invite the students to get there if they'd like, but it shouldn't be forced because as soon as it's forced, it's offline. It's fight and freeze.
Yeah.
And it's the mad dash to get to the circle by shoving the material somewhere. But if you do, you're going to get in trouble. So your dignity is at stake.
Oh man, 100%. 100%. I wish I heard this when I was an early childhood educator. Yogi, I wanted to pick your brain from a Montessori lens and perspective, even from a positive discipline framework perspective. What's the first thing you would look for when you walk into an early years classroom? Like what would tell you whether my space was supporting executive function or not?
Connection.
Love that.
Connection is the key for an educator
Yeah.
You have to know your children, and your children, your students in the classroom have to know you and know that you will be there no matter what, and you've got the calmness around you. If you're frazzled and flight, fight, and freeze, you're modeling fear for these young people. They need to know that they can count on you. So if you can just look at them, acknowledge them. My biggest thing that I will say, Dana, is I always shook a hand of my student, every student that came into the classroom. And it was so silly, but I always sang this, good morning, good morning, good morning, Hiba. Have lots of fun, choose lots of work that'll make you feel so great. And, I that continued for a while, and then the teachers came and they're like, I don't want to sing to these children. But that was like such a good connection when you're just acknowledging that student and you're making eye contact, you're shaking the hand. They're learning grace and courtesy, how to function in the world, but they're also, whatever's happened before they got to school, they're able to leave at the door. They can come in feeling safe. And this is a moment where I can say, what can happen next? What do you need to do, sweetheart? Are you going to wash your hands first? And then what are you going to do? So I'm developing executive function in this moment. I'm also seeing the student for any kind of injuries, bruising, because some states require that, some countries require this.
Yeah.
But this is now the child is connector. They can come to us. And you're keeping an eye on those who are just gone and doing their thing, but you're greeting students as they're coming in.
Yeah.
Made me
I
happy
think
when
this
you
is
said
where
my
trauma
name.
informed.
I can imagine
Right?
a child of 3 or 4 or 2. You'll be like, "Hey, Miss Yogi said my name. She said hi. She shook my hand." So yeah,
You're going
100%.
to want to come to school for sure. You
hundred
know
percent.
someone's waiting for you.
Exactly, 100%.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
might want to not, yeah, you might not want to leave your mom and dad. Maybe that'll happen for a week or two or on Mondays, after the holidays also.
Yeah.
However, someone cares about you and they want the
Right.
best for you.
Yeah.
Safe
It's
space. Yes.
important.
Yeah. I think this is where trauma informed practice and what you're talking about share a root, Yogi. It's something that I
Yeah.
used to come back to again and again in my years as a principal is that the brain is always scanning for safety. Um, and it cannot simultaneously engage in higher order cognitive work if it hasn't found that safety. And then what you said about predictability in the environment, so consistent routines, reliable transition, an adult who's responsive, warm, regulated, as you were, Yogi, when you got down, you said, hey, what do you want to do? Right? It's like you were saying to them, this is your space. That's not just being kind. It was you providing like the neurological um, necessity for executive function to then develop, right? Because if you had just been like, oh, I'm so glad you're here, but you're a little bit late. Okay, so we got to go. We have to get started. Come on, let's sit down for circle time. And then you ask them what they wanted to do. I don't think she would have been able to answer you as well as she would have in that moment, right?
Yeah. And sometimes they say no. I don't want to do anything. They just want to cry. And they said, it's okay. I feel sad sometimes. So validating feelings is another factor that we have to teach them that it's okay to feel emotions, and I'm feeling this way. All right. Would you like to sit next to me for a few minutes? Or would you like to sit in a chair somewhere and think about what you might want to do? Now we gave them space. We gave them time. We gave them ability to delay their gratification, have those critical thinking moments, right? This cognitive dissonance. Now they're thinking about what is it that I might want to do. I can calm down. So those are the small moments. So when I look in a classroom, and I was not always a perfect educator. However, when I did my Montessori education, during the training course, we had the pleasure of seeing Adele Diamond come, and she spoke at our school. She lives in Canada, but she was a guest, and when I learned about that, looking at the classroom from, am I developing the skills in these students? Am I guiding versus teaching? This is not my classroom, it's their classroom. So when I shift my lens to what does this student need and how do I bring them from where they are just a notch above, not 5 notches above, because that stretch is going to create the stress. So how do I think, how do I connect with my children from the heart versus my head? Because my head is often thinking ahead and it's fear of what this student may not get. How do I do this? But when I connect from my heart through the love that I have for the student, I can see them for what is missing. And I definitely was really challenged when children had special needs, meaning they needed additional support, and I didn't know how to provide it, because sometimes students come into our environment where they are wired not to be able to delay gratification, and they need a lot more practice and support and maybe occupation therapy to get them there.
Yeah.
So if the environment is really stimulating, which it is sometimes, it's so loud and it's so,
Yeah.
now I know that we can educate all the students to help with this student to say, this is what this friend needs. You know, when I was much younger in my teaching, I used to think all the children need to have this certain behavior pattern. But now we know that we actually can't imagine that, especially after having gone through the COVID-19, and we are just growing in this area. So bottom line, meet the children where they are, and we are not going to develop executive function in 1 year. However, we are going to aid to those executive function in our classroom, and we're going to do the best to provide that for each student. And we're going to keep notes on a daily note, what we're noticing, and then a year down the road, we can look and see where they started with us and where they're ending up as the new year begins.
I love how you talked about the self-reflection that you had as an educator, Yogi, because we've talked about what children need, but executive function doesn't develop in a vacuum, right? It develops in relationship, as we said, in co-regulation, in our daily presence of another adult who's regulated enough to offer that. So I wanted to ask, what about the educator's executive function? How does that play a role in us being able to support the children's executive function?
Yeah, well, delayed gratification. It's something that as educators we have to practice so often. So it's about modeling, right? It's modeling the behavior we want to see in our classroom. So if I want a calm classroom and I just go and say, children, get in circle right now. Well, if I'm frazzled, what am I going to invite in the classroom? So first, I need to connect with myself. I need to be intentional. And if I have a co-teacher, we need to know what our roles are. And we need to support each other and give eye contact, like, I need a break.
Yeah.
We can create environments in our classrooms which could be a beautiful library or a corner where you can go to calm. And I myself can put myself there when I need to be regulated. So when I'm modeling this behavior, that it is okay for us not to always act when we are in an irrational mode, when we're emotional, that we can regulate. Maybe we have a wheel of choice in our classroom for ourselves and our students that says, when I'm dysregulated, what are 5 things I can do to calm? Maybe that 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is my way. Or I'm blowing bubbles, or maybe that I'm closing my eyes. We have blindfolds in a Montessori environment. Just going to put a blindfold on and listen for sounds that I'm hearing and identify that, or smells in my classroom. We as adults can regulate. We can go from a mode of feeling overwhelmed to calmness, and speaking and asking questions versus constantly telling our students what to do, how to do it, right? That develops executive functions. What do you think we need to do before we can set up for lunch? Think about it. And when you're ready, you may start doing that slowly and quietly and calmly. We are going to go to the playground in very few minutes because time is not a concept.
Yeah.
Remember, if you have your workout, start slowly tidying up. I'm going to wait for you. I'm going to call your name. As you're cleaned up, I'm going to call your name. You don't have to rush, but maybe we're going to play a sound game. If your name begins with the sound ah, 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 you may line up. If you have finished putting away your puzzle map, now you can line up, because if there are two children with the same name and they have two different items, you're going to stress. So being mindful. I think as educators, to answer your question, we need to be mindful, playful, aware individuals to create some of these skills that we would like. And just get in yourself and find the calmness every day. Take care of yourself. Go exercise. Go ahead and have a balance between your home and work. And be fulfilled in your life where you're not coming to the classroom dreading that Johnny is going to spill the water for the 15th time. But see it as Johnny's going to spill the water for the 15th time, and how you're going to see that as a lovely opportunity to say, Johnny, today I'm going to give you a lesson on how to pick up a spill. And I'm going to share, Omar, how to do the same thing. I'm going to pair you up today. So if there are spills, you're going to do this together. And tomorrow I'm going to pair somebody else. But I'm going to create an atmosphere of collaboration in my classroom versus isolation, because I feel anger towards extra work.
Right? Isolation and defeat, right? So because when you're viewing it as you're already defeated, the child knows you've given up on them. But why try? Yeah, absolutely. We've covered so much ground today, and I wanted to end somewhere that I think, will be a positive note, because this conversation can leave educators really feeling the weight of it and energized to try and implement some of the things that we've talked about. So what does it look like when everything is going well? So when a child is in a setting where executive function is genuinely understood and supported. So what becomes possible for that child?
I can do it. I did it by myself. I am safe if I make a mistake. It's okay. If I make a mistake, I'm going to be able to redo it. When we see opportunities to learn, and teachers also, like as guides in our classrooms, we see mistakes as an opportunity to learn, because how do students learn? How did we learn?
Right.
Misstep. No one goes out and says, I'm going to spill the water. No one goes out and says, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
So also for yourself, teachers, you're going to make mistakes, and model, oops, I made a mistake, because that is how we know what not to do tomorrow. So with executive function, embrace the way things are, and embrace that things will happen in a very calm room. So having all these opportunities that are happening, it's a way that you can it's a predictor of what you need to give to the students. So enjoy the journey and write down all the challenges you had with the student and what lessons you've given. So you could look back and say, they've come a long way. But when we are looking at them every day from the same pair of glasses, that's all we see. But when you've written it down, you start to see all the amazing growth that has happened for the students, and you've been responsible in creating that. So
beautiful. Yeah, but do you have anything you want to add?
Honestly, Yogi just said it all.
Yeah.
Honestly, the way you put it, it was just amazing. I just want to say thank you. Honestly, I learned a lot today, and I'm in awe. So thank you.
Definitely.
thank you, Hiba and Dana, for having me. And, I do have free monthly mentor meetings on my website. It's yogipateltte.com. There are lots of videos, blogs. So my job, why do I do this? I want to plant the seeds so the flowers can bloom around the world. I want us together see these amazing students meet their own potential, whatever that might be. But I would love, and that's what my journey is. I just want to keep on supporting educators and leaders so that we can have safe spaces around the world.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm going to hold on to from this conversation, Yogi, was something that you said, maybe even in passing, but that executive function actually develops in relationship. And it develops in the presence of an educator in ordinary moments, as we talked about, the shoe tying and lining up and greeting them in the morning. And that means that actually every single one of us in the space of early childhood is actually already doing this work. So the question then is not whether or not we're doing it, but how can we do it with a lot more intention? Thank you both so much, Yogi and Hiba, for the depth and honesty you brought into today. I think the educators are going to listen to this and feel very seen in a way that not very many conversations in this space make them feel. For everyone listening, if this episode landed for you, share it with a colleague, share it with a leader, share it with somebody who needs to hear that work that they're doing and the ordinary moments that they encounter actually matters. For those of you who want to connect more with Yogi Patel, I'm going to leave the details in the show notes so you guys can visit her from the links that are there. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you all in our next episode.